This one's very personal to me because I happen to be married to an Enneagram 4, and it's taken me years of trial and error to figure out the 5 best ways to make 4s feel valued and special. Starting with a thing that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. When John and I first started dating, I quickly realized how much I actually was suppressing my emotions. Like, John was always asking me, "How are you feeling?" But he was never satisfied with the typical, "I'm fine" or "I'm doing great" response. He always dug deeper until my true feelings were out in the open. And here's what made this actually healthy, because I'm sure you've all experienced being vulnerable with someone and then feeling really uncomfortable about it, having that icky vulnerability hangover. But after I shared what I was actually feeling, John didn't run from it or make me feel ashamed. So I've learned that I don't need to fear sharing my feelings with him because he's never gonna push me away. He hasn't yet. He always welcomes it and embraces it, and then we move forward from there. And this is a 4's greatest strength. They are comfortable in the uncomfortable. It's why 4s make such good pastors, therapists, and hospice chaplains. They press into death and ugliness with bravery and curiosity, asking the question, how does this show me more of the world? Because that's what 4s are always looking for, right? More beauty, more meaning, more authenticity. And their relationships, whether that be romantic or otherwise, are not immune to that seeking. So if you're looking to be a good partner, friend, or family member to an Enneagram 4, it's not gonna do you any good to run away from vulnerability. In fact, leaning into it will only help your relationship flourish. So that's tip number 1. Be vulnerable and real with how you're actually feeling. Next, I thought it was important to actually hear from 4s themselves. So I took to Instagram and I asked the question, "Hey, 4s, what makes you feel loved?" One of my favorite answers was from Mariah, who said, "Don't try to fill the silent space with noise or questions. The silence is a sweet space to share." And this goes back to a 4's superhero ability to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. Because raise your hand if you've ever just talked about literally anything just to fill the silence. Guilty. But the problem with this is nonverbal communication is important in our relationships with others. In fact, studies show that 90% of communication is nonverbal and body language. So learning how to be comfortable in the stillness, or at least tolerate that stillness, is a huge step to a flourishing, thriving relationship. But I do want to note there is a distinction between positive silence and negative silence. If you've ever been on the receiving end of the silent treatment, you know that's true. Or if you've ever been vulnerable with someone or asked for validation and then they reply to you with silence, just nothing. That is so incredibly hurtful. So positive silence is necessary for relationships to last. So tip number 2 is to practice being comfortable with that. Because let's be honest, we all need a break from talking, and there is something so comforting in just coexisting with someone happily, just being and sharing each other's space without having to constantly fill the silence and entertain. But there's something you have to be aware of if you truly want to understand the 4s in your life. And it's hard to grasp because the whole thing is a little mysterious, even to 4s themselves. Because their entire lives, they've struggled with feeling like they're missing something, like they're fundamentally flawed in some way. It's connected to their core weakness, envy, which is the feeling that you're missing something foundational that other people seem to possess. When you meet a self-aware 4 who is aware of and trying to combat this weakness, they'll tell you that it's so incredibly healing just to recognize it and know that you are beautiful and necessary just as you are right now with the qualities that you already have. You might be thinking, this sounds like a really personal thing to be working on. Where do I come in? Firstly, just being aware invites compassion into the relationship. Because when you see envy bubbling up in your 4, you know that that's coming from a deep place of hurt. Secondly, and this is tip number 3, you can also be proactive and combat this feeling by telling them their soul message. Your authentic self has an impact on the world. But I know this wording might feel a little weird if you're not familiar with the Enneagram, so please tweak it to make it feel personal and like a message that they will understand based on like who you're talking to, right? Like you don't have to say things that I say word for word. You know your person best. One thing I love about 4s is they can be multiple things at once. They enjoy the sweetness of life, savoring small things that make them happy, like art, music, and nature. But they also don't look at the world through rose-colored glasses. They're going to face the facts that we are humans dealing with the ugliness of living in this world. There's bad stuff and sadness and death and pain and all of that. And 4s look at that stuff. They're not going to turn a blind eye to it. They see it. They're not afraid of melancholy or sitting with that darkness. In fact, 4s might even enjoy that melancholy. I know that John does because he tells me that he does. Unlike me, whose instinct is to immediately cover up those sad feelings, he relishes sinking into them. He'll think deeply about why he feels that way and what that says about him and the world around him. It's how some of his best poetry and music come into being. So tip number 4 is you don't need to cheer them up if they're sitting with something difficult. Now, I do have a caveat for this tip here, because a danger in this tendency for 4s is that they'll start seeing every single feeling as 100% fact. Just because your friend looked at you a little funny doesn't mean that they hate you, right? If you let your fleeting feelings inform every single part of your life, you're bound to misinterpret things and make drama where there really doesn't need to be any. But as a friend or partner to a 4, it is not your job to police this. That is where a therapist or a professional comes into play. I just think it's helpful, whether you're a 4 or not, to be aware of the downside here. Something you can do to help your 4, however, is matching your strengths with their weaknesses. Here's an example of how that works for me and John. John has so many amazing ideas for YouTube channels and sports articles and goals for the future and songs and just all of the things. He has such a bright, creative, imaginative mind. He gets really excited about them, he shares them with me, and then most of them drift to the wayside in favor of newer, brighter ideas, or simply it's just that life and work gets in the way. And I find this to be a common problem for other 4s as well. They can get overwhelmed with the details of how to bring these big ideas into reality, which is where your strengths come in. For me, I'm really good at creating momentum for other people. On StrengthsFinder, that's one of my main strengths, being an activator. So I'll sit down with him and I'll be like, okay, what actionable steps do we need to put into place for these ideas to actually come to life? Merging my practical planning with his big ideas is a big reason why I think we work really well together as a couple. So tip number 5 is to look out for the ways that you can help them bring their dreams and ideas into reality. But you don't necessarily need to be an organized planner to achieve this, right? You could have strengths of leadership, inspiration, or companionship. It doesn't really matter how you help them, just that you make the effort and show them that, hey, your ideas matter. That makes 4s feel so incredibly loved and supported, which is our goal for life and for this video. But if you're in a romantic relationship with a 4, you know it's not always cupcakes and rainbows. Sometimes what you're struggling with are the hard parts of being with a type 4. You know, the annoying things they do that make it difficult to communicate effectively and have compassion. Which is why in this next video, I break down the most difficult obstacles that you might be facing and what to do about them.